This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, the Cats delivered a second-half avalanche to get their season going. We'll dissect the Easter Monday clash, discuss Paddy McCartan's playing future after another head knock. We'll talk Tigers, the rampant Saints, and look ahead to the gather round. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Michael Gleeson, and joining us this week, Chief Football Writer Jake Niall and former Geelong champion Mathew Stokes, who we've wanted to get you in for quite a while, but we're waiting for a Geelong win, so we've had to wait until round 4.
Oh, that old chestnut, is it?
Yeah. Well, we're not working with new material. We'll stick with the old.
Absolutely.
But the Cats did have a big win. In the end, a big result, a big margin. Wasn't a big victory though.
It was a horrible victory, but we'll take it, especially on your 0-3. But it wasn't a great start when you're 0-3 and you come out the way that they did. I thought Hawthorn played a really attractive brand of footy early on. I reckon they should have probably been up at 5 goals at quarter time. Some really easy opportunities missed in that early part of the first quarter. But when we're 0-3, you take a win whenever you can, and we'll take yesterday, but hopefully we can improve next week.
Yeah. What do you make of that, Jake? I mean, do you look at them and think that's a season-writing performance?
No, but they weren't. The first game, they were okay. So Geelong, they weren't, and they're okay against Carlton. They just didn't win those games. So they weren't out of it. But it's a marathon, and they've got 9 games at Kardinia Park to come from this point on. Their draw is not, they have an advantage over other Victorian clubs. Mathew probably wouldn't acknowledge that, but they do have an advantage. There's been seasons such as 2014 where they finished 2 wins at least better than they actually were. And that's one of the reasons I believe that they bombed out in the finals. Not last year. They were the best team in it last year. They won 16 games everywhere. They went on a rampage. There's no reason they can't get back up into certainly the top 6. And on the basis of what they have on the field, I would expect them to still make the top 6.
But from that halfway point, the half time, they're looking dead ordinary. 10 goals to none. Hawthorn had 1 inside 50 for the quarter. What can you put that change down to?
Jeremy Cameron, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, he was great the whole game, but I think the motivation part is really fascinating for me because I think winning is it's very addictive, and you want to keep improving. I firmly believe, and I have no inside knowledge here, I've got some mates still at the footy club and close to a lot of the guys, but last year and the last 4 or 5 years has been really long seasons for the boys. You've got an older group. I wouldn't be surprised if this is some way, they probably don't want to be 0-3, that's for damn sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if the first part of the year was getting themselves right, preparing for the back end of it. Like you were saying, 9 home games. It's hard to come down to Geelong and win. If we can get to the halfway point, I think we were 5-3 last year at some stage leading into round 9. If we can get to a stage where they can get to a stage where they
you can say we, Mathew.
Yeah, we. Yeah, I'm biased. If you can get to that stage and you're healthy, at the end of the year, last year, we were just the most healthiest team at the right time. And we'll be able to string some really good footy together. So I think, for me, I look at that and go, yep, I don't think they wanted to be 0-3, but I reckon this was a plan, leading into the season to be able to gradually get into it.
I think also the game illustrated, Mitch Duncan comes back in and incredibly important. His ball use and you could see maybe he wasn't as effective in the first half, but he certainly grew into the game as well. It's his first game for the season. You saw what they've been really missing, and I think the discussion around Joel handing over the leadership and Paddy was a bit misplaced, but I think that Duncan was certainly incredibly important to come back in. I think there is truth as well in what Chris Scott says about they've brought in new player Broon and Henry, and they're taking some time to work out the system and to fit in.
I think one of the biggest things we lacked is that composure down back. I mean, Tom Stewart being out and injured in the first round and Mitch not being there, what it does is puts a lot of pressure on the guys, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but second-tier players who aren't as composed or aren't as good or as sure by foot. Mitch Duncan, Tom Stewart there gives that class.
Yeah.
And then it allows Busey, Jake Colladasny, Mark O'Connor to be able to flourish because they're not expected to be that anchor back there or to create or generate anything from the back line. They can just defend, and then that allows Mitch and Tommy Stewart to be able to be the guys who are used by foot to make decisions, to be able to bring that composure. So I think that's probably one of the things that's missed, and moving forward it's probably a good a way to steady the ship.
Jake, the Hawks, how do you come away from that? Do you come away feeling like, well, we showed some really good footy for a half, we're a young team, and we stopped?
Look, what I wanted to say about the Avalanche, just to explain it to the listeners, as I see it, 666, the number of the beast for Hawthorn. They've not been able to stem the flow out of the middle with Dangerfield, etc., Guthrie. Those players they're getting these massive clearances where it's going straight in for a goal. A bit like the grand final of 2021. It had that element to it where Hawthorn got one entry inside 50 for the quarter to 22 or 23. Now that's 10 goals to nothing. That's what's happened. It's come out of the middle. Jeremy Cameron's great achievement, in my view, was to keep Geelong closer in the first half when they were actually in trouble, and Hawthorn were playing all over them. They were well ahead in contested ball. They were well ahead in clearance. Hawthorn and entries. Hawthorn were playing really well. They botched chances. They could have kicked the first 5 goals of the game. They had Luke Bruce on fire early. But young teams don't sustain it. So I think if you're Sam Mitchell, the way you look at this is, we did it for a half. Now the challenge is, now can we get it to 3 quarters? And if we get to 3 quarters, eventually we'll get intensity. Yeah. Teams don't generally play a whole game anyway. Even the best teams don't. Geelong didn't. They're the most mature team in the competition easily. So for Geelong, it's a managing issue this year because they've got so many old players. How are these players going to last the season? They don't have Joel Selwood to flick the switch, so Joel Selwood's leadership is incalculable to me. I'd be interested in, do you think he can be replaced, Matthew? Or
I don't think he can be replaced, but I think it was something that the group needed. I think after a premiership, I think resetting and then being able to utilise different leadership styles. I think we had Lingy and Selzy and Hales, 3 of our greatest captains of any footy club, let alone ours. I think with the younger group winning a flag, I think Danger's leadership style was completely different to Sells. But
how different?
I think he's probably a little bit more personal. I think if you were to say, Joel is as good as a guy you ever come across in football. Make no mistake about that. But Danger has a bit of a laugh and enjoys his time there at the footy club. Practical jokes, pranks, and stuff like that. And I think, if you ask anyone with Joel, probably one of the things he probably didn't do too well was laugh at the footy club. He probably didn't mind laughing, but never was part of the laugh, if that makes sense. So I generally think it's something that the club needed, a different approach to the game. Now, you won't say you agree to that because of the way we've started the season, but I genuinely think that it's a good way to be able to keep the group with enthusiasm by bringing a different style of leadership.
It was interesting after the game, Jake, that Sam Mitchell spoke of the being in the box and closing in on 3/4 time, and he asks Mitch Lewis, "What do you think? What can we do?" And he then spoke about having, some experience out there in Luke Bruce, who was unfortunately at the wrong end of the ground where most of the trouble was happening. And it begs that question of, well, Sam, Tom Mitchell and Jager O'Meara. Now, they don't win that game still, but when you have got the 666 and you've got an avalanche, and the ball's streaming out of the middle, Tom Mitchell's going to help stop that. Now, we don't need to relitigate the whole reasoning for it, but it was.
The thing is, your ruckman can't necessarily put his knee up into the opposition ruckman to stop the flow. That was an interesting segue, but look, what do you do? Are you saying?
I'm just saying that
you don't have the experience.
It was one of these games that reinforced, okay, we're going with youth, and these guys will be standing in the way. But there are moments where you also think they would have been really valuable in helping young players. And as has been said, Jeremy Cameron has spoken about the fact that one of the things that he wanted to go to Geelong, one of the reasons he wanted to go to Geelong was to learn from Tom Hawkins. So you go to clubs to learn from the good players, the experienced players, and at the moment Hawthorn don't have that. But
this strip back thing will continue as a debate.
Yeah.
For the whole year.
It's just one of these moments where it's magnified.
The right or wrong of this will be proclaimed in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, 5 years' time, 6 years' time. If Hawthorn win a premiership, then we'll look back on this and we'll go, gee, they were smart. They didn't take short steps. They went through the pain for gain. And there'll be a team, we'll talk about Richmond later, but there are teams that go for it and try. And if Geelong hadn't won a premiership with the strategy they've deployed, there'd be a lot of questions asked.
You touched on that ruck thing. What did you make of that? It's an ugly look because it looks like you're just putting your knee through the bloke. It was a long way from the.
It didn't. It looked
It
crude.
was very early.
It looked crude to
I'm
me.
177 centimetres, that's for damn sure. I mean, Ruckman are a unique beast. I lived with one with Brad Oddens for a long time. But that's brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, that has the potential to really hurt. But at the same time, if you're the Ruckman for Hawthorn, and you've got Mark Blitzabs, who's a skinny little guy, and you need to make a statement, I don't see that as being wrong from a player's perspective. But at the same time, if it causes injury and you're trying to hurt someone, that's a bit of a different thing. But I didn't mind the statement, but I just didn't weigh the actions of it.
Yeah.
Well, De Conning did it. The Carlton De Conning did it against the Cats in round 2. Remember?
Yeah.
And that was that's when the memo went around. That's when the memo went
he
around.
was cited for it, and then it was he was cleared at the tribunal for the fact that it was a football act and it was, permissible behaviour within the.
But a memo went around to the coaches.
Went around saying don't
do it.
He's one of our most important Geelong's most important players. Why are we putting him in a ruck? I don't understand that. I mean, he does give you something really unique in there. But if he goes down, he's one of our, apart from Jeremy Cameron and Tommy Stewart, I reckon he's probably our third most important player. Don't put him at risk of that.
Well, the idea, though, I think Tony Shaw spoke of it, that a lot of the Geelong plan is to run past the middle and block the drop space because and therefore take away something
who
of
said
the.
this?
Tony Shaw.
And
to take something, knows a bit about ruck work. Tall fella like
he's
yourself.
He's shorter than me.
Yeah. He has roved to a lot of ruckmen. So he said, well, he's protecting his area, the Meek. But yeah, when you see the injury and the damage,
I go back to way back. I saw it in a final in the early 2000s where Brendan Lay did it to James Hird. I remember there was a bit of outrage about it. He didn't get. I don't think he got weeks, and it was. Lade played the next week. They won the final. But back then even, I thought, gee, that because he's put his knee right into him, and it didn't look good.
Lucky Toby Green's not a ruckman, or he'd be out for 6 weeks. Ollie Florent, that was the most dramatic non-goal. He celebrated like he'd won it, like he'd kicked it, and that was massive from Alir just coming over the back.
Yeah, look, it was a great win by Port, and it was one where. I never felt they were out of it, and let's be honest, they're probably helped by the concussions. We'll get to that soon. The McCartan,
We
Paddy,
can get to it now if you want.
Well, yes, but they were helped. But let's talk about Port first, and just some tremendous efforts by individual players, including Charlie Dixon at a centre bounce, Jeremy Finlayson to take that juggled mark and then slot that goal, and he's having the shot for goal with the hook kick almost straight in front. I go, what are you doing? Like, I'm watching it because modern players are doing this now. It's like they don't want the nerves of the set shot under pressure, and he slotted. He's a left footer, and he just hooked it straight through. And then they that got them the lead, and then this dramatic Sydney's ball movement was perfect to get the ball to Florent, and the camera shot from behind makes it look like a goal. Oh yeah, it's only when you get to the side shot that you realise that it hasn't made the distance, and he celebrated.
That was the more frustrating thing watching it too, because you relied on the broadcast. And the broadcast didn't have that side shot for quite some time, so they just repeated what they'd already shown you, which was. That looks like a goal. What's happened? Why are they celebrating? Was it? And then, of course, the side shot shows Alir just coming over the back.
I have always wondered, because you've played in games where there's been shots after the siren, haven't you? I've often wondered about whether teams have done enough to drill themselves on goal line defence, because I've wondered if you could build some pyramid formation or what you could do.
You're not allowed to.
No, but if you could just jump on someone's shoulders, and get a spoil, like get a touch. With goal line technology, if you get a touch, you're
giving too much credit to footballers. We're not that smart, to be honest.
Okay.
Maybe coaches are, but I think what it shows you is footy IQ.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is no directly at any individuals at Swans, but you can tell by the side that was never making the distance.
Yeah.
So why wasn't there enough more representation on there? I mean,
to block and shepherd.
Great punch by Alir, but it's pretty basic. Like I could even punch that. Looking at it again, it fell short, very, very short. So it wasn't like it was a touch and go goal.
No, it was not going to get the distance.
No, it wasn't.
So Florent didn't get enough on the kick, but he focused on the accuracy and didn't get enough.
You can't just shepherd the ball then. You can't just.
No, you can't shepherd after that. Well, you can't shepherd. You wouldn't.
So,
if it had been in play, it would have been touched.
Call that though. Shepherding after the siren has gone through.
Yeah.
I mean.
A few minutes
I can't talk because I couldn't kick over 30, so I'm not having a crack at Ollie at all. But I mean the limitations of that kick, and I think they were kicking into a wind. into the last quarter from the commentary.
It was a beautiful straight kick.
It was a beautiful straight kick. Just didn't have the distance.
You touched on the concussions before. I mean, it's like watching a boxing bout, isn't it, with Paddy McCartan? You're just sort of hoping that someone throws the towel and says, just stop this, which is terribly unfair if he's following the best medical advice and the doctors clear him each time to play and he returns to play and that's his career, let him play. But it just feels wrong.
Yeah, Matthew, you've written about last week about your experiences. You're seeing a neurologist.
Yep.
You wrote about that.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that. How many concussions did you have in your...
I probably had 5 to 8.
That's including juniors, or that's...
No, in the AFL.
In the AFL.
So some pretty bad ones in that time. Neurosurgeon every 6 months, scans every 3 months to keep ahead of it.
Neurosurgeon or neurologist?
Neurologist.
Neurologist.
And then you have your psych every second week to make sure that your thoughts and what you're doing with the processing of your...
Did you do that? I mean, if you don't want to answer this, it's fine.
Yep.
Did you do that in response to concerns, just for the listeners who haven't read the column, but
Yep.
did you do that in response to concerns about symptoms, or did you do it just because as a check?
No, definitely symptoms. I mean, I had serious concerns once I finished about headaches and migraines that I got daily, and blackouts and the colourful rainbow spots that I speak about in the article. For me, and like the article says, the game gave me so much.
Yeah.
You know, it gives you an amazing opportunity to do something that you could never have dreamt of. So for me, I never won anything from the game. I just wanted that protection of being able to pay for the medical stuff that I do, monthly. Watching it unfold, you kind of like, you want to butt out of it because it's none of your business, because that's him and his life and his career. But it's sad when you're getting knocked out and you're just hitting the ground and it didn't look like much. I follow a lot of the NRL, and Ponga, who plays for Newcastle, is one of my favourite players. He's a Queenslander. He's just gone to Canada. He got a very similar thing and went to Canada, saw a specialist and got reassurance that it's no long-term effects of his concussions. But how do we know? I mean, you only have to look at some of the past players who've gone through some pretty bad times to see that sometimes you actually can't prove that you've actually got anything until it's too late.
You get a scan, don't you?
I get a scan every 6 months.
So, I mean, are you able to share what the scan shows?
It shows not too much damage. I think I like to blame that a little bit more than I could, but what it shows, and for me, it gives you reassurance that you're okay for now.
Yep.
It's always tomorrow that you're worried about. I mean, I've got 2 young boys, and you watch them play footy and kick the footy, and not that it's ever deterred me from that, but it's something that you think about. The memory loss and the stuff that goes with it, it's real. It's really real. I think we're trying to we want to make sure that the players are looked after.
When you
but
talk
they look
about-
after themselves. They got to look after themselves as well.
When you talk about your sons, you're saying it makes you worried for them playing for concussions?
It makes me worried about anyone playing footy,
Yeah.
to be honest. Watching that vision, I can only imagine what his family would feel watching that, knowing sort of what I went through with some of the stuff, and you just look at it and it just doesn't look good for our game. But I like to just, for me, I've heard all the commentary and you like to keep out of it, but it looked really sad. I hope he's all right. They're an amazing family they are, and they're both great boys.
Well, here's the thing. Who should make... Where we lead to with this is who should make that decision. Should this... So 3 options.
Doctors, first of all.
Doctors, first of all. Whose doctors? The AFL might look at this differently to the club.
The AFL's insurer might look at this
That's
differently.
right. The insurer, the AFL's insurer might say, we want our doctor, our expert, to look at this and the risks, because we are liable if we allow him to take the field.
You like to keep it in-house, though, at the same time. And there is not one doctor in this AFL that wouldn't put a player's need second to the footy club or the team. So I think you can't take that away from a club doctor. I know a fair few, and I know my 2 club doctors I had for the 11 years, and they're nearly my best mates because of what they were able to do for me and look after me and continue to do now. So you don't want to second guess our club doctors at our clubs, because I know from first-hand experience they have nothing but the best interest for a player. But at the same time, we do need to take away, especially when it gets to stages like Paddy, where we need to go to the experts and maybe people outside the field to be able to talk about it, because it is something that the clubs and the AFL are going to have to deal with, because the NFL did. The NFL is the biggest business in the world when it comes to sports.
We'll move on because we have got to cover the other games. Injuries have also beset in a different way, the Tigers. And we've got Tom Lynch now with a broken foot. Toby
And
Dane
get a couple of weeks,
Curvis,
probably get a couple of weeks at the tribunal as well.
they'll be incidental.
Yep.
Because he'll be out anyway now. Toby Dane Curvis, syndesmosis, ankle surgery, on top of the injuries that they already had. Is it the moment that they now put the fork in the season? And
No, you don't put the fork in the season now, but if it gets to the bye and they're well under 500, well under 50%, then, which they may or may not be, they're a great club and they've got a great record of regrouping. So no, you don't. But Richmond behind the scenes have to be thinking very carefully about their list management strategy over the next few years, because they don't want to end up in a Hawthorn type situation, which they've not sold the farm for Hopper and Taranto, but they've sold a lot of acres.
But the troubling thing about it would have been that was their first choice midfield, and they were thoroughly beaten by the Bulldogs. So they had Hopper, Taranto, Prestia, Martin, Bolton, all available and all in there, and they got monstered by a very good midfield as well, Bontempelli and Liberatore.
They've got a guy called Bontempelli. You can debate
special.
Jeremy Cameron, but you know
No, you can't debate that.
we can debate anything. And Bontempelli, I don't know where, it's a week to week thing. Who's the best player in the cold? Fortnight to fortnight or month to month,
Quarter by quarter sometimes.
quarter to quarter sometimes. But he's right up there. And he's also had games that are, interestingly to me, the last couple of games, we've always known he's more of a Scott Pendlebury, smooth mover, sort of classy player. But his last couple of games have been Joel Selwood, get down and dirty kind of games, and get the ball forward, strength overhead. He's a package of abilities that's considerable, and the leadership he's shown with Liberatore. And Liberatore is a fantastic inside player.
Well, he kind of reminds me of Jimmy. There's not one person in the change rooms that would be happy when it starts raining and it's windy and it's a crappy conditions.
Pull out the long sleeves.
And let's get dirty. I mean, he just thrives in that. But I think Richmond, I do like the approach they're having though. Like Cochin as a sub, it shows you their intent and the way they want to play. And maybe the midfield did get beaten pretty soundly on the night, especially in crappy conditions. But I do like the intent of and the way that they've taken it. Like they must be, talking to the players and when you get older, you understand that these are decisions that are made and you've got to deal with them. So to be able to, I think it shows a lot about the group as well. Koch being able to sit on the bench, being the sub, embracing it. I know he definitely as a professional, you're not embracing it, but you understand it and you can deal with that, and especially if you know the direction of the footy club.
And I think. The selling the farm thing you mentioned, I'm not on board with that, because I also think that they're not old players, and they're both good, solid players.
Yeah. But here's the thing: if you compare it to some of Geelong's moves, Geelong had an opportunity to pursue Jacob Hopper, and they chose not to. They didn't want to pay that level of contract. It's a 7-year deal. They've both got 7-year deals. These two players, they're good players, but they're not superstars.
And they're not. I'm not directed at this, but they're 7-year contracts. They're out of control in the AFL.
Yeah.
I mean, there is way too many so-called superstars who don't deserve or haven't earned.
What's the longest deal you got?
Probably 12 months from Barmy. That was a week-by-week contract I was on. I'll go a 2-year contract. I mean, I played when 3 years you were classified as a really good player. And I think you do have to move on. The eras have changed, right? And you've got to, list management are all about trying to making sure that we're looking after now, but also protecting our future. So some of these guys are, on X amount of money, and over a long period of time, like Buddy, by the end of it, 1 million wasn't that much. It probably still is.
He got 9 years. Though.
Yeah, he got 9 years. But I think it's a way of doing it. But I do think that the 7-year contracts are way out of control.
Jake, we go straight into gathering. You're almost due to get on the plane, aren't you, to head over and
yes, I'll be
cover
going.
a weekend
I'll be going over there
in the Barossa Valley.
If only. Michael, if only
I'm sure you'll find a
there
way.
was some nice Pinot Noir, on the offer, but I'm sure the AFL will avail themselves.
Yeah, it sounds very kumbaya, doesn't it? Gather round. It's like a Paul Kelly song,
It's actually from a Bob Dylan.
Yeah,
song,
yeah.
But anyway,
there you go.
The times that are changing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Probably the most anticipated one of the round is the undefeated Saints. Coming up against Collingwood, who dropped the game against Brisbane with no rucks.
Yep. Well, it's be a great test for St Kilda and for Collingwood against Rowan Marshall to see how they go against a really good ruckman in Rowan Marshall, who and how important ruckmen are. It asks a deeper question of the value of ruckmen in the competition, because they're going to probably, I suspect they'll go with Frampton in the ruck Collingwood.
Well, it's interesting.
And try and keep their forward structure, because they lost 2 things against Brisbane and they fell apart a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Ross signalled the value of a ruckman by resting his ruckman and having him subbed out of the game with an eye to this week, that they don't have a ruckman. He's the player we most need to preserve going into this game. Yeah, St Kilda doesn't have a multi-pronged tall forward line, so they could probably use Frampton in the ruck instead of key defence, and therefore McStay returns forward of the ball. They looked unsettled to me a bit, Collingwood. I mean, they certainly stuffed up those 6 positions and free kicks.
Yeah, no, they weren't. They were off, and their pressure. I mean, a lot of footy, certain teams like Richmond, Collingwood rely heavily on pressure, and their pressure in the first quarter, I think the rating was 215 or something, which is astronomical. They kicked 5 goals. They were playing all over Brisbane, and then the second quarter, where they got absolutely diced, that dropped down to about 170, which is sub AFL average. So the pressure rating, and then they got sliced through. They got some turnovers, a few skill errors, and that was the game. That was pretty much the game in that period. And Brisbane are a very good team, and they will not lose. They'll hardly lose a game at the Gabba. I think they've beaten Melbourne and Collingwood up there, and they're probably, if you looked at the premiership betting market at least, and I shouldn't encourage people to bet out there, but I think Melbourne and Collingwood are at the top of the list in terms of where people see teams, and Brisbane have accounted for them both pretty well.
Yeah, did it raise questions for either of you about structurally for Collingwood, the defensive, the height they push their defenders up the ground, and they were caught out. A lot of players were caught out on turnovers, and Brisbane forwards just in acres of space.
One of the things I watched now, I don't like pumping up Collingwood, but I love watching them play. I really enjoy it. But also too, you've got to know your limitations as players. There's so many tap-ons and fumbles, and it's like, get the ball, take the tackle, and then let's reset. Where they want to keep the game going and flowing as quickly as you can, and that's great when it comes off, but when it doesn't, and when those nights when you need just to settle, you need to regroup, you're not going to be able to do that. In a big final, that's going to hurt you. The way that they play is so attractive that I watched the game. I watched Collingwood play. But I think there's too much of the tapping and the fancy showboating stuff that it's showboat. And when you're winning, it's great. It comes off. But when it doesn't, it looks really bad. And I think some of their players got found out with that part.
Well, they're coming up against a coach in Ross Lyon that, he doesn't... If you run into the wall of Ross... he'll have defensive measures in place to deal with that sort of show. If there's any showboating, that's the coach you don't want to be against. And I'll be fascinated personally by watching what Ross Lyon does with Nick Dacos. Because Nick Dacos is a decision that other clubs are making, what they do with him. He's a phenomenal second-year player. Like, I think we'd have to go back to probably Chris Judd. I know Joel Selwood was incredibly good early.
Different types of players.
Different types of players,
Juddy,
but more like Chris Judd and the impact he's having, where teams are going in. I think where it's different, teams are going in and actually planning about him.
Well, last week Ross went in knowing that Matt Rowell had been Gold Coast's best midfielder for the previous 3 weeks, and they shut him down.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of work into him, and he couldn't get near it. And, they put in the time. And I'm sure that Nick Dacos will be the focus of the time they put in.
Who
this
played
week.
on Rowell?
I think it was multiples, from what I could gather from the coverage.
Yeah, they just put a lot of body onto him, especially at stoppages. I mean, and I think that's what I love about the old school Ross the coaching, is that defensive mentality. We allow players these days now to rack up 30 to 40 possessions, and they don't have any impact on games. When they do, we should be able to stop them. We should be able to throw someone on them. And Ross Lyon has got that mentality. When he had Baker, he had Dempster. There was a number of players that they went through. They could shut players down, but still have an effect on the game. And I think that's something that I reckon the games lack these days. You can, as a midfielder, you probably should be getting 25 to 30 possessions a game.
Yeah. Well, the other week, I know Kenny put Lockie Jones to him, and then
that didn't work very well.
That didn't work well. He moved him onto the ball, and Dacos moved onto the ball into a half forward flank and moved around, and it didn't really.
Well, Zorko got away from him and got out the back and helped hit the scoreboard. I think that's another way to play Nick Dacos, is to actually go the offense and say, well, he's running around without an opponent, and we'll exploit him the other way. That's the other way of looking at it.
Maybe they put Mitch Owens to him, who was incredibly good as a half forward. If Nick's playing off half back, what a find! Super talent.
Yeah, Look, St Kilda, I think they've been almost the story of the season so far in terms of what they've done with what they've got.
I always worry a bit about the hybrid forwards. You know, the almost a key forward, but almost a small forward.
Yep.
And they're about like an all-rounder. They can be very, very good, or they can be neither of either thing. But he looks like he's something.
Yeah. He looks to me like a player.
Yeah, he does.
I know a particular player that you played with.
And who's that?
Steve John.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just enjoy the actual.
You see the parallel?
I do. Yeah, I do actually. I hope he doesn't have. I hope he has the same attitude as Stevie too, because it'll go a long way in becoming a great player. I love the passion that St Kilda are playing with. I mean, the laughter and the enjoyment, and that comes with winning, right? But you can see they actually want to play for each other and the game style, and that only comes from a relationship-driven atmosphere where your club and your coaches are on the one page. So I've actually really enjoyed the laughter, the fun. You know, Jack Higgins and those guys in the forward line getting up and about. I think as a supporter, regardless of what happens for us a year, you've got something to work on.
But I reckon he's given them belief that they feel like
absolutely.
They trust the game they're playing. They trust their team. They've got players that are playing with self-belief like Mason Wood. But they're playing, you know, moving Sinclair onto the ball was good. Yep. Like he's got that agility and that lateral movement in the way he moves. And that was really important as he moved him onto the ball. You know, some of those small forwards, you know, it's he's getting the best out of those guys again now. Like,
absolutely.
You know, and they're not young kids. They're, you know, you're talking about Higgins and Butler. You know, they're Gresham. They're hardened players now, and they're playing with great belief. So too are the Blues, who take on Adelaide, and
big game.
Adelaide have already surprised, I think.
At the time of this going to air, we don't know the Harry Mackay tribunal verdict, but that would be a pretty big factor in this game.
Yes,
it would almost swing it towards the Crows.
Oh, not that big, is it?
I don't think it's that big. They're a pretty good team, Carlton.
Carlton are very talented, but the Crows have been excellent.
They have been
They've
excellent.
been excellent. They beat them there last year when Carlton were playing for a spot in the 8. And the Crows are probably the most, well, depends how we assess St Kilda, who were at 8-3 last year. Just missed the 8. They did fall away late. But I would say the Adelaide might be the most improved team. Right at this moment. On what I've seen, they haven't had a bad game. They got overrun by Richmond. By Richmond, but they also coming back from that terrible hot game against the Giants where they ran out of gas. And their performance against Fremantle, I watched the game and I was really impressed by the brand they're playing and the honesty of this side. I think it's a very honest side.
They are. And the run. And the guys like Thilthorpe are now starting to become the players that, you know, they've got that few years on them now to start owning positions.
Yep. And Isaac Rankin is electrifying. And you look at what the Gold Coast have lost. If you take a player like that... They didn't want to lose him, to be fair. They didn't want to lose him. You take him out of the Suns and you put him into Adelaide, it's a swing towards the Crows. And, you know, I feel for the Suns. I mean, think of the players that have left that club. And it's just incredible. Like if players like that had been lost from a Melbourne club, people would be screaming.
I was doubtful of why... At this point of their development, they went after Rankin, thinking that he's more a cream player as a forward, but he's not. He's better than that. He's a transformational player.
He's a match winner.
He is a match winner, and you can't have too many match winners in your team. And he certainly just changes.
What do you think of him?
He's just special. I mean, as a kid, but not even talking about his footy prowess, but he's just as a kid, he's got something special about him. Watching him play at Gold Coast, you're like, what happens if he played in a good team?
Yeah,
and I think that's a lot of the players. You know, you look at them and go, geez, they would be really good in Melbourne. You can't take them all, as much as probably some of the Victorian clubs would love to, but just watching him play, that freedom of just being able to be given the space to do whatever he wants to do and play his own style without it being sort of... And I think that's what some things we do as an industry. We limit our players, not only as how they get interviewed or people they are, because we turn them into robots because we want to be able to, you know, toe the team line and all that, but watching him just play and just with the freedom of it is something special to watch.
Yeah, he's had a racial vilification, Isaac Rankin, into social media. Again, this has happened to Indigenous players in particular a lot. It happened to Jamari Ugle-Hagan.
Yep.
And it's happened now. As someone with an Indigenous background, how do you Do you have any? Can you share anything about this? About theories about it, how you deal with it, or how the social media part of it seems to be something that the AFL is really struggling to cope with?
I do have an opinion on it. I think also too we like to silence the victim, or we like to silence sort of that voice. And one thing I'd never want to do would be to silence someone's experience of what they've gone through. So I congratulate Isaac for making a stand, but also too as a industry, are we giving too much fire to these guys? Because it happens weekly. And for me, we live in a society where 98% of the people are really great humans, great parts of community. Our footy industry is really great. I love the inclusiveness of the footy industry, but we constantly are focusing on that really bad 2%. Those 2% are really going to be shit people regardless in our society. So I do think we do need to stand, but what I get sick of is education. We throw out this, we need to educate. Well, how long do we have to educate people for? Really? What's right, what's wrong? I mean, male, female, black, white, it doesn't really matter. You know if it's going to hurt someone, that's wrong. Yeah. So I get sick of that. That's the only thing I get sick of the AFL industry, is that we talk about constantly, we need to educate. Well, we're done with educating people. You know, if you were to talk about a person with a disability or a female or any other way, it's just wrong. It just shouldn't be accepted, regardless of who or what they say. If it's racial and it's directed towards someone, it's going to hurt someone. So let's just start to cut it out without it being the education part.
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything to that, or should, in fact. And it seems a bit frivolous to move on to another game, but we are the Bombers, and you talk about Trent Cotchin and him coming on as the sub. Dyson Heppel also, Essendon's used him in that way. What does it signal, Jake? What is that?
Well, he's in the twilight, and they're carefully managing him as the coaches do these players who offer a lot of leadership, but who can't physically do what they used to be able to do. I think it's really good coaching, actually. I'd rather have Dyson Heppel involved in the game in some form rather than not playing at all.
Is it an irrelevance, or is it like Damien Hardwick raised the idea? Well, why don't we name 23? Why do we have to have it as though we've dropped Trent Cotchin when our plan all along is to play him as the sub, as the 23rd player? It seems a fairly reasonable complaint to me to just say, well, we'll name 20. Can't we name just 23 and say this is the nominated sub?
Probably.
Yeah, would have thought it's a common sense approach, which is probably why it won't happen. But you would think that the AFL could step in and just do it. The Bombers, they've now got Melbourne. Will Ben Brand come straight back in?
If he's fit, yes. Yeah, I think he's been really good when he's played. I'll be interested to see how he goes with Van Rooyen. How they work together, but they've got to try it.
He feels like a player you just got to keep playing too, though, doesn't he now?
Van Rooyen, yep.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. I think Ben Brown looks better on the field too with that new haircut. I actually like it. I enjoy watching the big fella play. And the Dyson Heppel thing, just with the sub, I think I look at it too, another way. If Boomer Harvey can be a sub and cop it on the chin, any player can do it. Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'd rather the old players be it, because they can deal with it, instead of being younger guys who are trying to find their way in our game. And especially, I don't understand how we're making first gamers sub. I hate that. I really hate it with a passion. But I do like the experience, like you were saying. You'd rather have Dyson Heppel in your team in match day than playing in the VFL. There's nothing for him to gain, or I reckon the younger players to be playing as a sub, than Dyson Heppel being the experience. And I've heard he's just absolutely ripping bloke around the footy club.
Fantastic.
To have him around and that little bit of an older head to be able to and help Zachy Merritt as well, who's still learning the way to be a captain. So that's my probably 2 cents for the sub. But I actually
don't have as big a problem with the kid, the debutant being the sub as certainly than last year. Now that it is a guaranteed, you're going to play. You are going to come on. And it's not like being a medical sub where you had to prove a concussion or something like that. So you could go the game and you're listed as playing a game without actually stepping foot on the ground.
So let's put it in a journalist's perspective. Yeah. You work your butt off to become a journalist.
Yeah.
But Jake's writing the first part of the article, and then you just write the last 2 paragraphs.
No, he does that all the time.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Wrong example.
I just look at it. Wrong example. Sorry. I just think
he jumps on the story more.
Yeah, it takes the exclusive, does he? I just think it's one thing our game has with this beauty of a first game, family coming, and not knowing when he's coming on.
But
I
isn't
just
it
hate
also, yeah, I get that. I also don't mind the idea. The game starts, the heat starts to go out of the game. You're not going in, you're coming in a bit fresher, second half of the game. Well, if things go as they play, I mean, you could be on in the first 2 minutes, but, second half, midway through the third quarter, you get on and you have, 45 minutes. You'll be gassed anyway. Most players in their first game.
I reckon I ruined mine in the first minute of the game, so I'd blow up then. So I get that. I just, the whole family kind of feel, I just don't like that let down of not being able to get on to maybe sometimes the fourth quarter.
Well, welcome back and straight into a listener question from Joey, who loved Cam Rayner's game on Thursday night. Says, surely he can't be moved back to defence now.
Joey, you're right. Of course he can't be. So good. You've answered your own question. And Cam Rayner is a forward mid, more of a forward than a mid, a match winner. Some of the things he did, he's got huge distance off the tee in his kick. He's powerful. He can win one-on-ones. He's got speed. He's come off a knee reconstruction. Just let him settle in the forward line.
There you go, Joey. Rhetorical question. Well answered by Jake. For both of you, Freo, can they turn it around from where they are now?
No. Just simple, no. I don't think they can.
What's wrong with them?
I think there's a lot wrong with it. I think, and also too, I mean, in the trade period, they lost a couple of players. That second to third tier players, and just sitting underneath some of them, probably B graders, C graders. But what happens when you lose those guys is that you actually lose your depth in your team. And they brought some guys in, but I do think they over finesse. I think there aren't enough just tough bodies in there to take the hits when they need to create a big contest when they need to in the back line, and take a big clunk when they need to going forward. So I think there's a few parts of their game that have been found wanting in the start of the year, but I'm not saying that they can't. They obviously got a few home games, but looking at them over the last 3 weeks, they've really stuffed up my tips, and they've also, they're not playing with a really attractive brand of footy at all.
No, well, you look at them, Jake, and they've only won the one, and it was over West Coast, who lost half their team.
And they were losing halfway through.
And they haven't played a good game yet.
No. Yep. Well, they're still playing.
And they haven't played the top sides.
No.
So this is a real concern for Justin Longmuir. And I a few things that have been wrong with this club, and it's up to Peter Bell, the footy boss, and Longmuir, and the CEO, Simon Garlick, who's a smart footy operator. They've got to look at this very honestly and look at, okay, how is the style of play we have? Why is our ball... I think they've been caught out a bit on ball movement. Their trend has been towards
that build it up from the back.
Yeah,
style.
it's a bit patient, a bit more careful behind the ball, and I think the game's gone past that a bit at the moment. That's the first thing. The second thing is their trades. I think that the Luke Jackson decision was one that I was very questioned. I questioned at the time.
You're not a fan of Luke Jackson as a style of player.
Well, not for that club, not at the Dockers. I think if he'd gone to the West Coast, I've openly raised whether he was the right. Now, it's a long-term deal, so maybe over the period of years. But they already had a ruckman, so do they need Darcy and him? Did they put the resources in there for
Darcy? We'll one may
end up at another club. That's quite conceivable.
He's a good compliment.
They're good. Jackson's a good player, by the way. I'm not saying he's going to be a very good player. He's going to be a very good player. But right now, it's not helping them, right? So in this year or so, it's not helping them now because they've got a problem with the two rucks, and he's not a forward. Jackson's not a forward, in my view. So that's the second point. And the third point is Jager O'Meara. They took him on, and I don't know that it fitted their needs. What do you think, Gleeson?
Well, one, he's heavily subsidised, so they're only paying a couple of $100,000. 200 to 300 grand of his wage. I think Hawthorn's paying 500, near enough too. So, in that sense, didn't cost them anything. He's playing, but he's not really adding to them.
But now, Will Brodie got dropped. So Will Brodie got dropped.
That's the concern.
So I think that they've got to look. Fremantle are going to have a look at things very closely and ask themselves some hard questions.
Yeah. Well, the one with Jackson I find is that, further to your point, it's a large amount of money to spend on a second ruck who isn't a great forward. So, what do they do? Do they continue with Darcy? Anyway, they're bigger, longer term questions.
Geelong will take Darcy off Freo's hands if they need to.
We'll move on. Another question from a listener. This one from Sam saying, "Can I get some love for Harry Sheasel?" I think that's pretty easy to get right now.
He's incredible.
He's a real chance for the Rising Star.
I watch North, and watching him and. What do they call him? LDU. It's incredible. I mean, as a North Melbourne, you got Clarko coming in there, which gives you a bit of pizzazz. But watching those two young boys play, is bloody impressive.
Yeah.
They're bloody good players and they're tough, but they also do the other stuff. They kick the goals and they seem like they're very team orientated, which makes you they'll fit in anywhere.
But it's extraordinary because LDU has, like, he's been a promising player. He's now arrived as a genuinely elite player.
Yep.
Sheasel's arrived in 4 games and it already looks like he's played
elite.
150.
He does. He absolutely does.
Well, I'll tell you, that Rising Star award with Sheasel and Ashcroft from the Brisbane Lions, Will Ashcroft, like that is going to be a hell of a race. Ashcroft playing in the better team, Sheasel getting a lot of responsibility in a lower team. But they're both exceptional
I thought
players.
this might have been the Sam Darcy breakout year, and I had him in there, but that's not looking so good right at the moment. But I think he's still going to be a good player, but it's just not this season that he's coming through. A listener question from David: how do you think the new 4 umpire setup is going? It's always a loaded question when you ask how umpires are going.
Well, I'm not affiliated with any footy club or anything, so I can't get fined. But I think we can't even with the 3 or 4, we can't even catch a throw. The disposal watching over the weekend and how many players throw. Or
Lipper had a red hot one,
and it's just like, how can you not see it? I'm dumbfounded, and this is no disrespect to umpires. I know they have a hard job, but if it looks like a throw, it's a throw.
Yeah. But they haven't seen it.
Well, they get close to the ball then.
Well, yeah, but this is all about what you can see.
How can I see it on TV and they can't see it?
Yeah, but what's happened, Matthew, is games in the past
Matthew.
were not.
Yes,
Matthew.
Go to your room.
Well, games in the past weren't all televised, so there were probably throwing's been going on for 100 years, but now we see everything in close up and we're seeing things that the umpires can't see.
Poor old Cam Zerha nearly had his head pulled off.
Yeah.
I would have thought an umpire would have seen that, but as you say, they clearly haven't, because you couldn't see that and not pay a free
There was
kick.
a couple of
It
the
was
doggies.
just
A couple of doggies got away with a couple
he's completely pulled
of
his head
rugby,
off. But,
couple of rugby disposals.
Yeah, but I think, if that's the worst we can get them, that's probably a good thing.
my only concern with the first start of it, when the first couple of weeks, it felt like there was, and maybe it was just a teething problem of the umpires getting involved, but with 4, it felt like they had to have their moment blowing the whistle.
Yeah,
everyone had to have a say, and then there seemed to be a bit too much consensus umpiring, where it was like talking to each other before making a decision. Oh no, I saw it as that, and I don't know, just seemed a bit clumsy. But maybe they were just teething problems, as you said. A listener question from Blair: why is it that we still pause play for the blood rule, but not for some head knocks or other injuries? We know why the blood rule was brought in, but things have changed drastically since then. It's actually a very good point.
It's a very good point, but I know coaches and how smart they are, and they will absolutely love this if that was brought in, because you would be able to stop the flow of the game really quickly, and players would jump in and buy into this. So
if you were Sam Mitchell, you'd have someone going down with something?
100%. I would be going out to a younger player that's not having an impact and say, you're going down to the next contest and stay down. There's no doubt. I have 100% guarantee that the coaches will exploit this. As soon as you even think about this, I do understand what they're saying. This is a really good question. But our coaches, they're weird, our head coaches.
So they don't send them out to bleed them.
But
they
they're
don't
very
send them out and
smart.
cut them to create a blood rule.
Scotty is the most intelligent man I've ever come across. He will
Easy.
find...
What about present company?
Oh, yeah, that too. But they will exploit this. But I do genuinely think that this is a great question. But, yeah, I know exactly what the coaches would do.
Yeah, well, look, it's a good question by Blair. Matthew's answered it.
Matthew again.
Am I in trouble or something?
Yeah. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to you both, Jake and Matthew, for joining us. Thanks also to Channel 7 and Fox Footy for the audio we've used in this episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. And join us on Thursday for the Round 5 edition of our Expert Tips podcast for Gather Round. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you then.